Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 20 of season 1 of Babylon 5, Babylon Squared. I just want to take a moment before I get into this episode to send my condolences to Mira Furlan's family. She was the actress who played Delenn across all the seasons of Babylon 5 and all of the TV films of Babylon 5. She was a great actress and, by all accounts, a very lovely lady. She came to America following the difficulties in Yugoslavia in the 90s, and for her it was very much a new start. I did meet her once. I'm going to drop a photo in here of the one photo I have of her from a convention in 1997 in the UK, in Blackpool. And I think she had a really lovely time on the series. I think it was personally important to her. And I think for the fans, she was a really, really important character in the show. Had a really great arc in the show. And it's a great sadness. She was taken relatively young, I think she was 65. Some random virus, not even the COVID virus, would you believe. I think apparently she was bitten by a mosquito in America, where she lived, and got a virus from that. And very sad. And it's sad that a lot of the crew have passed by now, but I suppose it's just a natural part of life after all. So, having said that, let me get into this episode for you. So, there are unusual tachyon emissions in Sector 14, and they've disrupted Ivanova's circadian rhythms because Command and Control have had her up early looking into them. And a Star Fury Alpha 7 is on the way to look into it, and it's a 3-hour trip in normal space. Sinclair was taught by Jesuits for 3 years, which made him appreciate mornings, unlike Ivanova. Sinclair mesmerises her into nap time by recalling his meditation technique, and when she nods, a quick switcheroo is performed by Garibaldi, so that when they wake her, she thinks it's 7:30 and has slept through her breakfast. She races off to C&C, thinking she's late for a shift, without breakfast. Sinclair retrieves his breakfast and legs it, looking over his shoulder and telling Garibaldi he'll inform his next of kin. Sure enough, a death threat is shouted by a less than impressed Ivanova, who has presumably just checked the time. Garibaldi engages smug mode. Alpha 7 is indeed detecting increased tachyon emissions, and something shimmers into view in front of him, which he says is impossible, but then there's a bright burst of light. The Star Fury seems to be returning to the station, but there's no word from the pilot, and Sinclair is wondering if the tachyon burst they detected just after they last made contact has shorted out his comms. Sinclair wants Medlab put on standby. Delenn takes a Minbari flyer out solo, saying some things one must do oneself when asked if she needs a pilot. She jumps out. Alpha 7 does return, but does not commence docking procedures, and scans reveal the ship is fine, but lacking life signs. The pilot is dead. In Sinclair's office, Garibaldi is struggling to explain the cause of the death. The pilot looks okay superficially, but despite having only just turned 30, the prognosis is a natural death from old age. Clearly, that shouldn't be possible, but that's what scans of his organs indicated. It seems the pilot engaged autopilot just before he died. Sinclair wants more information before anyone else goes out there and orders traffic routed away from Sector 14. Delenn's flyer comes out of hyperspace and she starts scanning for a beacon. Garibaldi shows Sinclair and Ivanova the buckle from the pilot's harness into which had been scratched B4. Ivanova thinks it might mean Babylon 4, the station's predecessor, but as Garibaldi notes, it disappeared 4 years ago. Sinclair, however, notes that the tachyon emissions are coming from where Babylon 4 was last located, and then a distress call is reported from C&C, apparently coming from Babylon 4. The mystery deepens. They cross-check Earth Force archives to verify the source of the signal, and it's a match for Babylon 4's verification code. Garibaldi protests that it can't be the station back from the past like some sort of Flying Dutchman. Sinclair plays the distress call. The station, although Commander calls it a ship, has just gone online, a skeleton crew of 1,200. The signal is shaky and they lose it as the commander says it's happening again. Ivanova notes the timestamp on the message is 4 years out of whack. Garibaldi remains a skeptic, but Sinclair orders an evacuation effort that Ivanova thinks will take about 10 hours running shuttles back and forth. Sinclair warns the ship crews that the situation is unpredictable and gives them an opt-out. No one takes it. He and Garibaldi are in a transport with others, escorted by Zeta-wing. 6 shuttles in total, 2 hours and 57 minutes one way it seems. Hope they brought some in-flight entertainment. Delenn's flyer hangs in space at an unknown location. She seems to be resting, but then a Minbari war cruiser is seen on approach as she touches her controls, moving her ship in to dock with it. On board Sinclair's shuttle, 2 hours to go. Garibaldi decides to pass the time by asking Sinclair a question. Pants. That means trousers, I think, for the UK audience. Fasten then zip, or zip then fasten. There's some debate as to what sort of question that actually is, as Garibaldi morphs into Joey from Friends, explaining he couldn't remember which way he did it that morning, and that got him thinking. Eventually, Sinclair replies, fasten then zip. Garibaldi smiles and agrees. Just under 2 hours to go. Now Garibaldi wants to talk socks. Sinclair says he's not having this conversation. Back on the war cruiser, Delenn changes, and the Grey Council assembles in the same room we saw Sinclair interrogated in, or a replica of it. She takes her place in the circle in Valen's name. She is grey. She stands between the candle and the star. They are grey. They stand between the darkness and the light. 8 are now 9, for the first time in some time, and 10 cycles have passed since the death of Ducat. It is time to choose a new leader. Delenn does not understand why she has not been consulted. The answer is simple. She has been chosen to lead them, based on her wide experience. She says that she only wishes to serve, however, not to lead, and refers to the prophecy. It seems she may have seen the last of Babylon 5. At Sector 14, they've arrived. As tachyon levels increase, Babylon 4 becomes visible, green instead of blue, and a different configuration to Babylon 5, but the family resemblance is undeniable. There's a disruption field around the station, and Sinclair orders the evacuation vessels to hold position until he and Garibaldi have checked it out. They take their transport in. They enter cautiously, and it's just as well. A clearly disturbed crewman starts taking potshots at them with a PPG. Sinclair holds his attention and draws his fire, while Garibaldi gets in behind him and gets control of him. The station commander, Major Kranz, arrives, and the parties are introduced, with Sinclair continuing to omit their Babylon 5 affiliation, until Kranz asks if their ship was in the sector. Then Sinclair tells him, carefully. He seems to accept the implication, and asks what year it is. He says they need to hurry. Suddenly there's a flash, and Sinclair is elsewhere, else when. He and Garibaldi are dressed in their riot gear, and Garibaldi is clearly in the correct place from his point of view, while Sinclair is displaced. B5 appears to be under attack, to the extent Garibaldi has rigged the station's fusion reactors to blow, and is making a final stand with the PPG equivalent of a Gatling gun as a hole opens up in a bulkhead. Sinclair gets pulled away by panicked civilians, and flashed back to the present. B4's commander says it's different for everyone. A flash, then forward or backward in time, they're unstuck in time, and they need to get off. Delenn is explaining to one of the members of the council that while part of her does yearn to answer the call to be leader, her heart tells her that she needs to stay with Babylon 5. She wants to recall the Grey Council rather than take up the position. Apparently no one has rejected the offer for 1,000 years. He says they will think it is ego driving her, but he accepts that this is what she needs to do. Evacuation of B4 has begun. Unusual external shot of Scene C with Ivanova coordinating the second wave of transports. B4's commander explains the disturbances started 24 hours after the station went online. Time track systems started to glitch. Then he takes them to see an unexplained visitor, Zathras, an alien of unknown race who came out of nowhere. He stands when he sees Sinclair, seems to recognise him, but then dismisses him, saying, "Not the one." Zathras won't talk, mustn't talk, told him they did. The one is hurt. Zathras must find and help him. Apparently Zathras just appeared in a conference room after one of the time bursts. Sinclair asks why he's here. He tells him they need this place to fight, the biggest of the Babylon stations. So they take. Garibaldi isn't overly subtle about asking, but Zathras tells of a great war, a terrible war, a great darkness. Zathras warned, but no one listened to poor Zathras. They need B4 as a base of operations to bring peace to the galaxy on the side of light. The One is their leader. They live for the One, they would die for the One. Garibaldi asks where in time they're trying to pull the station, the future or the past. For Zathras, it's the year 4993, but of course that doesn't mean anything to the humans without a point of reference for his world. Just then, a crewman runs in and says it's happening again. The Major goes with him, and Zathras ducks out of the room with them as they see a blue spacesuited figure materialise onto the corridor outside. The figure is phasing in and out slightly and moaning. Zathras says it is the One, that they stop the station in the here and now at risk to themselves to let the crew escape. Sinclair goes towards the figure and reaches out, but as their hands almost touch, an energy discharge blows him off his feet. In the confusion, Zathras passes a device to the One, proclaiming it fixed, and the One vanishes. Garibaldi helps the dazed Sinclair to his feet. Zathras is retrieved by security and encourages them all to leave, saying they are done and there is no more time. Delenn explains to the council that Delenn said that some amongst the humans had a destiny, and that because of prophecy they halted their war. She went to Babylon 5 to better understand them, and she says that that mission is not yet complete. She acknowledges that they are young and have much to learn, but that they are stronger than they know because of their ability to struggle and grow, in contrast to the Minbari, who are very steady state. She said that they are the future. So it's put to a vote as to whether she will become outcast or allowed to remain in the Grey Council. She's laying it on the line for her belief that her heart is right about her place, not the Grey Council. Enough of the council remains lit to support her, just. The Minbari we saw in And the Sky Full of Stars was, I think, the first to go dark, interestingly. Things are getting equally desperate on B4 as the crew clamour to get off. Garibaldi's on crowd control and managing pretty well. Zathras explains that he gave the One his time stabilizer so that they could survive the next time jump. Now he doesn't have one, but maybe they'll make him a statue and remember him, as he'll have helped win the Great War. He's happy if he's helped the cause. He says if they try and take him off the station in this time, he'll die too. Either way, it is bad for Zathras. Garibaldi reports tachyon emissions are way up. Whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen soon. Then he flashes back to Mars, where Lisa's confronting him about his decision to leave for the Babylon 5 job, despite only having met Sinclair twice before. He'd been on Mars for 5 years by this stage, it seems. This is clearly the split he was telling Talia about during Voice in the Wilderness. B4's commander is adamant he wants Zathras along as proof about what happened to the station, despite Zathras' statements about him dying if he gets taken off. Sinclair is uncertain, but essentially the Major pulls rank. It's his command until he leaves. They're going to be the last to leave. As they reach the dock area, the time quakes cause structural damage and Zathras is pinned under a beam. Sinclair wants to stay and help while the others bolt, but Zathras tells him he has a destiny and asks him to go for Zathras. So he does, although he seems almost reluctant to leave as Garibaldi urges him to get to their ship. Meanwhile, the blue-suited figure appears again next to Zathras, who smiles and says he trusts the One. A computer announces that the time distortion has been repaired, and the blue-suited figure removes his helmet. It's a much older-looking Sinclair, who says it all happened just as he remembered, but he tried to warn them. A hand reaches out to comfort him, and we hear Delenn's voice. Babylon 4 finally blinks out of this time shortly after Sinclair and Garibaldi clear the distortion field. Sinclair is comforted by the idea that B4 will still be fulfilling its mission if it does manage to bring peace to the galaxy, even if it's in a way no one expected. They head back to their station. Back on the Grey Council's cruiser, Delenn is back in her ambassadorial clothes. Her friend approaches her to say goodbye, not knowing whether she will again see the inner chambers of the Grey Council. He passes her a triluminary, one of 3 it seems, which she is shocked by. He says he feels that change is coming, that it is a time of signs and portents, and that she will have greater need of the relic than them, and that it won't be missed for a while because there are 2 others. Ivanova is annoyed that she's missed out on the adventure and says next time Garibaldi can stay put and she'll go, if they ever see the station again. She's not familiar with the Flying Dutchman reference Garibaldi made. Sinclair explains about the lost ship and says it never found its way home. Oh, this episode. Another arc episode, as you might have guessed, coming hard on the heels of the Voice in the Wilderness 2-parter. As important as this episode is, I have always remembered the comedy at the start of it, with the breakfast practical joke, and of course the zip then fasten then zip debate on the shuttle. Let's take the lower key Delenn arc first. Here we see, for only perhaps the second time, Delenn interacting with members of the Grey Council in the present. It's interesting that the Grey Council has seemingly not replaced her, even on an interim basis, and whether that could have created deadlocked 4v4 scenarios, I'm not sure. We've seen Delenn's strength on the station in various episodes, but I think this is perhaps her biggest challenge to this point, in that she has to choose to stand against the wishes of the Grey Council itself and pass up a great honour in order to try and hold on to her position on Babylon 5. Her heart versus the calling of her people. She is, after all, religious caste, and so that probably helps with her decision, but it is nevertheless a gamble, and risks further fracturing the stability that the Minbari hold so dear. We know from Draal's observations in the previous 2-parter that Minbari society is under strain after the war, and a further delay in appointing a leader is unlikely to help the healing process. Just as in Believers, Delenn truly believes her path is right, whilst the Grey Council see themselves in the same light. In reconvening the Grey Council, Delenn effectively rejects their choice of leader, whilst praising the potential of humanity despite their near-genocidal campaign against them. No wonder the Council is confused as to why she would want to remain amongst them. They simply do not have the perspective she has. So they vote, and even now I'm not quite sure what the outcome was, because Delenn is clearly not sure if she'll ever rejoin them, as she admits to her fellow Satai as she leaves. He clearly has faith in her beliefs, and knows that change is coming, so it's touching to see him entrusting her with the Triluminary as she returns to the station. It seems he too is following his heart. In stark contrast to the war cruiser, we have the Babylon 4 action. A dead pilot leaving a clue, and in a sense a dead ship that did find its way home, his Star Fury. Time travel is of course a component of many science fiction shows, and it comes as no surprise that this episode's arc is left very cryptic, as JMS has 5 years to play with. The interior of Babylon 4 is of course very familiar, but that's perfectly reasonable. There's not much time between the 2 stations after all. I thought they did a great job with the CGI model of the exterior, again different yet similar, and the simple approach of using a different coloration for the outer skin immediately removes any confusion you might have about who's who, so to speak. Zathras dangles a whole bunch of carrots here, and by the end of the episode we see why he initially mistakes Sinclair for his The One. And yet that still leaves a huge number of unanswered questions, not least of which is what on earth Delenn, or someone who sounded very much like her, was doing there with him, taking the station who knows where in time. We also don't know how old he really was. He looks much older, but we know that the time fields there can age you prematurely, so we can't be sure. We don't know if the war Zathras is talking about is a future war or a past war, only that Babylon 4 could play a critical part in its outcome. Thinking back to signs and portents, Sinclair was shown a prophecy of the station's destruction, and we see in this episode a flash forward that looks like it might fit into that prophecy, with Garibaldi fulfilling what he sees as his destiny and making a last stand to get Sinclair out whilst denying the station to whoever the attackers are. Again, cryptic as hell. We don't know when that might be, or how, or who's attacking. You can imagine how the newsgroups reacted to this one back in the day. Garibaldi's flashback is more relatable because we know it happened in the past and why. We found out about it immediately before this episode, in fact. It fleshes out that backstory unexpectedly quickly, I must admit I'd forgotten that even happened in this episode. All it really does, of course, is make him want to get the hell off the Flying Dutchman all the more. The great strength of this episode is really in the last few minutes. Imagine the show as a jigsaw puzzle. Whilst this episode is of course a piece in and of itself, it also hands us another piece at the same time by revealing who's inside the blue spacesuit and placing someone who is presumably Delenn there as well, and they are moving with the station as it travels in time. That piece of the puzzle is only anchored to this episode right now, but we know that characters we know are tied up in the time jump somehow, so although that piece lies within the boundaries of the puzzle, we simply have no idea of how or if it might someday link up with other pieces. So just as A Voice in the Wilderness took us properly off the station and gave us a new geographic setting, now we have the potential of a new temporal setting and a great conflict with massive repercussions. Just as Delenn pointed to potential for growth in humanity, this episode points to potential for growth in the sheer depth and richness of the show itself. Shows like this get painted as space operas. I don't know what that means, but it sounds belittling somehow. Whatever it does mean, Babylon 5 was never just about the episode of the week. It's a tapestry. It's interwoven threads telling a tale, not just a series of images. That, I think, mattered to me. It made me invest in it. It made me curious about how it would all turn out. It made me care. And speaking of caring, on a personal note, it occurred to me thinking about these quite early episodes that I couldn't quite remember when I first started watching the show regularly, given that I was at university for much of it, and yet remember that for the most part I had it on long play videos. I think my mum used to record it for me, bless her. I need to ask her, but I bet she did. I couldn't have done that when I was in halls. Mums are great. So, yes, great episode, if only because of the sheer number of hairs it set running. Nothing like this sort of episode to get a fandom engaged through rampant speculation, especially when it's cleverly done as this was. Like when they ask Zathras what year it is, and he answers them, but it's of naffle use to us poor ignorant humans because they don't know where he's from. Not everyone in the universe goes by BC and AD. Frustrating, but completely logical, like much of this episode and the show at times. So, just 2 episodes to go in the first season now. I'm glad this was an episode with a lot of Delenn, given what's happened in the past few days, as of the time when I put this video together. And I believe the series will have a streaming home by the time you hear this, which is good. Faith manages. Please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you for the next one.